was talking to another person. I'm sure we're all familiar with Chad Sanderson about uh, ownership, and I just like what he says. Very simple. He's like, "There's a difference between an owner and ownership. Like owner is a label. Ownership means there's actually something that you're responsible for, and you are actually held accountable for. It kind of completes the RASI matrix, right? And I think that's something that's really important. I brought up decentralization as sort of a leading question, but I think a lot of the data mesh conversations are in the guise of the original self-service conversations we were having for analytics, you know, 5, 10 years ago, where it was, we want to move towards self-service and decentralization because we've become the bottleneck as the centralized team. And so it makes logical sense that you do the work. But I don't think we ever enabled enough or educated organizations enough to say, like, you now have to enable that team. It can't just be they're responsible now and you hope it all works out. So, I mean, my question from this, and Matthias, maybe I'll start with you. How does a centralized team that typically was doing everything from data to dashboard become more of the enabler of decentralized teams? Like, how do they start to put their like enablement hat on, or educating domains on how they can do this on their own, supporting them with technology in some way that isn't too complex? How have you seen that happen?
Yeah, I think that these existing data teams or centralized teams can really play a vital role as advisors, as mentors, as educators to those domain teams where many people may not be these deep data experts, right? So certainly they should provide education, mentoring. They should be developing and providing best practices. For example, best practices how to build, how to manage a data product, how to version a data product, these types of things, right? Maybe provide examples of how to do this. Maybe provide examples of what is a good data product, what is a bad data product, what to avoid. Maybe some hand holding, right? Maybe I need to go into a domain and develop the first 2 or 3 data products with them together before they get the hang of it, because it will take time. And I think one important part there is also that some companies have mentioned to me that these data professionals then, when they're working with the domain teams, they really should do this also with a lot of patience and empathy, because they will take time to learn. They will not be perfect on day one. They will make mistakes, and that must be acceptable, right? And still help them to grow over time where they want to be.
Makes sense. Abby, what about you? I mean, how does the role of a centralized team, assuming most organizations probably start from a centralized model, or maybe smaller organizations starting from like purely just decentral, like what does the role, is there a role for a centralized group? Right.
So I've talked to Scott about this, and I know he has some strong thoughts on governance, and I'd be interested to hear how he thinks about this now across lots of different companies. But I've talked to Scott about this on his podcast and in other settings about how, for me, the key is this, what I think of as the analytics engineer role, right? Which is not necessarily how the rest of the industry thinks about this analytics engineer role. And like the way I've set this up now at a few companies is uh, that the central team embeds deeply as a center of excellence, embeds into these data producer domains uh, to do that mentorship and facilitation that Matthias is talking about, to be essentially the architect that is overseeing the data products that are being built in that domain, and then coming together in some kind of a more centralized committee to manage things like interoperability. Now, at the scale of organizations that I'm working with, right, which is mid-market and enterprise, that's still manageable. That's at the scale of some of the organizations that Scott has had on, like a JP Morgan or whatnot. It may not be manageable any longer. But certainly, and again, organizations are in different places. But for me, what I've found, being a potent here is doing that forward deployed model for this analytics engineering function that really serves as an architect and guides people along, and then also comes together to think about the polysemy, to think about the interoperability, to think about the use cases and the joinability across all these different domains. But yeah, Scott, would love to hear thoughts from you.
Yeah. So you said one thing in there, and it was really funny because you used JP Morgan Chase as the example. They were recently on a panel and they said, they had really decentralized into every domain. And then they found domains that just didn't have enough data for it to make any sense for them to decentralize. So they created a central team for managing 5 or 6 domains. And then they'd create another central team for managing another of these 5 or 6 small domains. This is about adjusting it to what you're trying to do. If you're trying to implement this from the kind of theoretical, you're going to go down bad paths versus find what works for you, find how you can actually align these with how your business already works, how you're already doing business transformation. Because if you don't do that, you're going to end up, pulling against the way the entire organization is going or the way the entire organization works. If you just say, you now own the data and you just have to follow all these things that the data team do. But that central team is crucial in some way to upping the capabilities. However that rolls out, I don't care. Right. Like I had somebody tell me that they were sneaking in things into the developer platform. They were sneaking in more and more features. And the developers were like, ooh, what's this? What's this? And they started to own more and more of their data because that's what matters is getting to what it is versus, I mean, it's obvious exactly what you're talking about. It's like, what matters? Like, what are you trying to accomplish? Not how do you do exactly data mesh? That at the end of the day doesn't matter.
Yeah. I think
Agree.
the more organizations you talk to as well, it's like you could probably fit whatever you're doing to the topics of data mesh in a way, shape, or form, right? Retroactively. So it's like data, it's great if you don't have a starting point. You should shoot for this theoretical concept of decentralization, automated governance, domain ownership. I think those are all valuable principles to set on. But then it's like, how do I meet my organization where we're at right now? Realistically, we have to drive value at the end of the day. And it's not necessarily about who gets to data mesh first. It's what are your business objectives? What are your business KPIs that you're trying to improve? And then tying your data and analytics work to that. And I think if you always have that mindset, you're never really concerned with, am I following this playbook to a T, right? It's more about like, we're improving against our business metrics faster. So I think it makes perfect sense. It's really insightful to hear from you.